So, as mentioned, I'm the RSM for the Sherbrooke Hussars. I've been in since January 14th, 1999. So I'm closing in on a grand 27 years very soon. So I haven't done any mission tours. I've stayed within the region. I am a reservist. So most of my time is spent at Global Excel and on weekend exercises with the regiment and Tuesday nights and functions like this. Next slide. So back in my youth, this is what got me attached to the unit. I started off as I started off as an armored crewman. So my first training was a driver on the Cougar platform. This is an exercise. This is from my summer out in Wainwright. So as you can see, things got a little interesting. We had a little dead carcasses of calves in the field, so one of them ended up being a token of appreciation, I guess. It's kind of like a little something that we put on our vehicle. Next slide. The unit's also gone down to Fort Knox, Fort Hood. So this is a photo back when we went to Kentucky. As you can see, the combats were a little different back then. I'd say it's about 2001. Next slide. That's me in the turret when we switched to a reconnaissance platform. So this is in Mississippi. As you can see, quite a lovely day. Next slide. And this is where we're at today. So our vehicle was here on Canada Day last year. It's our Tab V vehicle. So it's basically a bigger armored type of vehicle that we use for reconnaissance. Next. And this is basically about 2 years ago, beginning of COVID hit. It's when I took the role of RSM. We did our change of parade ceremony at the Army Navy. So there you go, the Legion, or the hut, was there for us when we needed them, when we needed a place. So that's where we did it. Next. So now it's time to talk about my unit. So who is the Sherbrooke Hussars? So as mentioned, we're a reconnaissance unit within the Canadian Armed Force Reserves. We belong to the 35th Brigade, and we fall under the 2 Canadian Div, which is all of Quebec. We make up roughly of about 110 reservists, and notre mission, c'est de générer, entraîner, maintenir les troupes de reconnaissance blindées légères polyvalentes, capables d'accomplir les tâches assignées dans l'ensemble du spectre des opérations, afin d'être en mesure d'appuyer sur ordre les efforts expéditionnaires et domestiques des forces armées canadiennes. Next one. So, on va commencer avec un peu des couleurs. On parle historique. Les feuilles d'érable et le castor représentent le service rendu au Canada, la couronne au souverain. Les 2 têtes de cheval représentent la tradition de cavalerie du Sherbrooke Regiment et du 7th 11th Hussars. Le crave, qui provient des armoires de la famille Almer, représente le 11e Hussard, et le bras gauche, l'arme du cucurie, reflète le bras d'un cavalier tenant son sabre, une image qui ornait autrefois l'insigne du 7e Hussars. Our motto is in hoc signo stabilitas, which means steadfast by this sign. This motto is a combination of 2 previous mottos, one that came from the 53rd Sherbrooke Battalion of Infantry, in hoc signo vince, which is in Latin, by this sign we shall conquer, and from the 11th Hussars motto, steady. Next. Ideally, I'd have a nice little board here to show you. It's a little unclear, but I can provide the images to the historical association, historical society afterwards. It's something that's produced by Dr. Morrison. It basically talks from 1812, from when the militia was basically around before Canada was even born, and it goes all the way up to current day. My main focus today will be on the 53rd, the 58th, and the 54th battalions, and as we work our way down. There's a little bit to the right, which is more affiliation. I'm not forgetting them, it's a little bit more complex, and I kind of only have a short amount of time to discuss it all. So I'm going to try to wrap up 157 years-ish of history in the next 10 minutes. So next slide. So, bien qu'il soit reconnu comme que l'histoire du Sherbrooke Hussars débute en 1866, la présence militaire dans les cantons de l'Est est encore plus ancienne. On peut retracer nos racines jusqu'en 1803. À cette date-là, Sir Johnston formait un corps de milice avec des hommes venant du 2e bataillon of the Townships. Sir Johnston et ses hommes servent en 1812 lors de la guerre contre les États-Unis, et plus tard il fut mobilisé de nouveau lors du émeute de Papineau en 1836 et la rébellion du Papineau, la rébellion des Patriotes en 37 et 38, et en 1846 quand la loi était créée, le Regiment of the County of Sherbrooke comprenait les 3 bataillons qui étaient le bataillon 1st Battalion à Lynxville, 2nd Battalion à Danville, and the 3rd Battalion à Union. So, à cette fin-là, le régiment perpète 3 unités qui ont combattu, the 1st Battalion of the Eastern Townships Districts, the 4th Battalion of the Eastern Township District. Next slide. So the Fenian raids. Fenian raids basically happened because in 1846, the islanders were starving of famine. They came over to North America. They lived more in the South, in the United States, around Boston, New York, and eventually made their way up north to take over parts of what is soon to be Canada. So on the 7th of June, 1866, about 250 people crossed the lines near Saint-Amand de Friedrichsburg, and they came on Pigeon Hill and installed themselves. They stayed there roughly 3 days before any militia arrived from Montreal. The 1st and 2nd Sherbrooke Rifle Companies, the Sherbrooke Volunteer Cavalry, the Bishop's College Rifles Company, and basically went up to Island Pond and Stansted and started doing searches on trains. At that time, the government looked a little unorganized, so this is when things started to get interesting. Ils ont mis un pied sur terre avec des bataillons d'infanterie en cas d'une attaque future. So, le 14 septembre 1866, l'ordre était donné pour la création d'une série de bataillons à Huntington, Hemmingford, Rome, and Sherbrooke. This is where we're going to fall into the regiment history. Next slide. So, 21 septembre 1866, the Sherbrooke Battalion Infantry was born. À cette époque, ce régiment de la conscription de Sherbrooke comptait 3 bataillons et était constitué en groupant 6 compagnies indépendantes d'infanterie et de fusiliers. So we had the number 1 company Sherbrooke, and I'm not going to name all the dates, it's all throughout the 1800s. We had the 2nd company of Sherbrooke, we had the 3rd company that was in Danville, the 4th company in Melbourne, the 5th company in Richmond, and the 6th company in Lynxville. Those 6 formed what now is the 53rd. Next slide. So the Fenians, they started to regroup near the border between Canada and the United States. And as of March 1866, there was a threat of the invasion in Stansted. So once the creation of the Sherbrooke Battalion of Infantry was created, they went up to Stansted, started doing inspections of trains, making sure things weren't being passed across the lines. And the 1st and 2nd Sherbrooke Rifles Companies, the Volunteer Cavalry, Bishop's College Rifle Company, and the Sherbrooke Battalion in future years ended up in that area. The 53rd itself, their headquarters was in Melbourne, Quebec, and the first CO was the Honorable Lord Adolphus Aylmer, which is the son of the ex-Governor General of Canada at that time. So the next year in itself, it goes through a bunch of naming changes. It's not necessarily important to the story, but as you can see, 53rd gets renamed, and then about a week later, it gets switched around again, so it's now like the 54th, 53rd. So the battalion itself in Sherbrooke was divided into two, one for the Richmond region, one for the Sherbrooke region, and then in May they decided, okay, well the 53rd was already Sherbrooke, so let's go back to the 53rd number, and Richmond became the 54th. I know it's going to get a little confusing, but basically you're going to have to remember 53rd, 54, and 58 in the next little couple slides. Next slide. This is just a digital restored photo from one of my friends. So as you can see, it's a little bit of what the uniforms were in the period of 53rd soldier. And you can see a doctor has taken blood pressure of somebody that was in battle. Next slide. This is a photo from the 54th Richmond Battalion. This is also with the 11th Hussars, I believe. Yep, 11th Hussars. When they deposited their colors in the church at St. Anne's in Richmond. So the 54 Richmond Battalion of Infantry, they had companies in Danville, Melbourne, Richmond, Brompton, and Durham. Next slide. So this is the insignia that they wore, the helmet plates. Obviously the crown represents the monarchy, the 54 is the battalion number. So in August 1903, the 54 Richmond Regiment was converted from infantry to cavalry and redesignated the 11th Hussars. Next. So in the Fenian Raid period, we talked a little bit about before Canada existed. Well, July 1st, 1867, that was the day of Confederation. So, suite à la guerre américaine et l'attaque des Fenians, les colonies décident de créer la Confédération canadienne. En prévision du 1er juillet 1867, l'ordre est donné de formaliser des bataillons déjà créés et créer d'autres. So this is where the 55 Mechanic was born, the Compton 58th was born, and the Mississauga 60th was born, the 52 Brome, Shefford, 79th, 79th of Shefford. We're not going to talk about those other small units, but they existed at that time. Next slide. So, the 58th, it was created the 11th of October, 1867, and it represents the Compton area. It originated in the town of Robinson, which I think is the old town of Bury, if I'm mistaken. It had companies in Bury, Gould, Winslow, which is Stonaway, Marbleton, Lake Mechanic, Compton, Quaticook, and Stansted. Then in 1903, the 58th Compton Regiment was converted from infantry to cavalry and redesignated as the 7th Hussars. That, I'm pretty sure you guys have a good idea is because I've seen it all around the building, I've seen it outside, I see it on your slides, so it's all good. Next. So we have our 3 battalions. We have the 54th, 53rd, and we have the 58th. Fenian Raids, Part 2, 1870. Next slide. Not going to discuss exactly what happened. This is a general layout of the battle in itself along the border. And Stansted, you can kind of look at the image, place yourselves mentally with some of the positions. So the new attack from the Fenians come from Vermont. The militia receives word that this is going to happen. So 53rd, 54th, so Sherbrooke, Richmond, and 58th Compton get on their horses and between the 10th and 30th of April head out towards the border, and again between the 24th of May and the 7th of June to Fryersburg. 25th of May, the whole militia of Canada deploys. The Fenians are stopped, and there is a counterattack on Eccles Hill, which you kind of see right there. Next. You can see what some of them look like. It wasn't just soldiers in uniform. Not everybody had uniforms back then. Just regular town folk there to do their job. Next slide. Eccles Hill. Next slide. So we've kind of covered the Fenian period. Next up, the Boer War. So this Boer War was in South Africa. The 3 battalions of the area deployed with the Royal Canadian Regiment of Infantry in 1900. They participated in the capture of 10 cities and were implicated within 37 engagements with the enemy. Within 30 days, they marched 327 miles, and this was done over 21 days there was a battle. So during this time period, on May 8th, 1900, 53rd Sherbrooke Battalion became the 53rd Sherbrooke Regiment. The 54th Richmond Battalion became the 54th Richmond Regiment, and the 58th Compton Battalion became the 58th Compton Regiment. So all these infantry battalions now became regiments, which is normal because the war basically brought on the age of cavalry. Next slide. So now we're in the 1903. This is the year of the change. So, as I mentioned before, in the Boer War, it was determined that we needed more cavalry units. So on May 1903, or May 1st, 1903, the Compton Regiment was converted, and then that became what is now known as the 7th Hussars. In 1903, on the 1st of August, the Richmond Regiment was also converted and now became the 11th Hussars. So you can kind of see where this is heading towards. We've got the 7th and we've got the 11th. Pretty soon we're going to have the 711. Next. So for the 7th Hussars, the regimental headquarters was in Bishop's Crossing, which is now known as Bishopton, I do believe. A Squadron was in Bishop's Crossing. B Squadron was located right where we are right now in Bury. C Squadron was in Scottstown, and D Squadron was in Cookshire. Squadron is basically a grouping of people with horses. For the 11th Hussars, the regimental headquarters were located in Richmond. Obviously, all their units are still in that area as well. Next. So when we're now 1904-ish, going towards 1910, and what is going to become World War I real soon. Next slide. World War I, the war of all wars. August 1914. So, the 12th Battalion, Canadian Expeditionary Force, il y avait 91 officiers et hommes du 53rd Sherbrooke Regiment, 82 officiers et hommes du 54th Richmond Regiment. Il faisait partie du premier contingent canadien qui allait à l'Outre-mer. Il faisait partie du premier division canadienne, partie du 4e brigade. Puis ils ont été formés 6 août 1914 avec des soldats des Maritimes. 3 octobre, on prend le bateau, on y va vers l'Angleterre et rendu 29 avril 1915, on change pour devenir un bataillon de réserve utilisé pour entraîner les autres remplacements. So those 3 groups of units that went over to the seas, they didn't partake in the battle in itself. They were there basically as training. Next slide. This is where it starts to get interesting, but also a little not disappointing, but sad in a way as well. 1914, October, 5th CMR was created. It was made up of members from the units of the cavalry units of the Eastern Townships, donc 7th Hussars, 11th Hussars. Cette unité fut la première véritable construction estrienne de la Première Guerre où 2 de ses membres reçoivent la Croix Victoria. 16 de nos honneurs de bataille furent mérités de ce régiment. En décembre 1915, le 117th Eastern Townships Battalion fut levé et déployé à l'Europe. On parlera plus d'eux autres un petit peu plus loin. Toutefois, cette unité fut désuète dès son arrivée au Royaume-Uni pour renflouer les autres régiments, donc le 5th CMR. Next. I won't get into the battles of the 5th CMR. There's a bunch of them. If you want to have another conference, let me know. I can start going through them, but as I said, 16 battle honors shows that we're in a lot of different areas. 5th CMR itself, the first couple battles, I don't want to say were wiped off the field, but out of 900, there's maybe 100 that didn't receive any wounds at that time. So, the 5th CMR. Ça fait lever précédemment à partir des membres 7th Hussars, 11th Hussars, 26th Stansted Dragoon, and this was the first unit that participated really in the First World War. Était déployé en Europe en été 1915 et sont servis au sein de la 2e Canadian Mounted Rifles Brigade jusqu'en janvier 1916. Puis après ça, ils sont transférés d'une unité cavalerie à une unité infanterie et ils sont joints de 8e Infantry Brigade. On a 2 de ces personnes-là qu'on mentionne tantôt ont reçu la Croix Victoria, qui est le Lieutenant Rutherford and Major Perks. Next slide. So, on voit la photo avec les 2 individus qui ont reçu la croix. Lieutenant Rutherford, il a participé à l'offensive de Monchy-le-Preux le 16 août 1918. Une fois sur l'objectif de la bataille gagné, il a continué seul vers l'avant pour reconnaître le terrain. À l'extérieur du village, le lieutenant Rutherford fonce droit sur une section de mitrailleuses allemands. Il crie à l'ennemi de se rendre, sinon ces mitrailleuses, qui en réalité qui n'étaient pas là, vont commencer à tirer. Après discussion, la section allemande se sont rendus. Le lieutenant ne s'arrête pas là et crie à une autre section de mitrailleuses allemandes située non un petit peu plus loin de se rendre encore. L'autre section se rend. Sur un total de 2 officiers et 43 hommes allemands sont capturés par un seul individu qui était M. Lieutenant Rutherford. The second guy who received the Victoria Cross Major Perks received it for bravery during the Battle of Passchendaele. There's a movie on Passchendaele, great movie, by the way. October 30th, 31st, 1917. During the battle, he brought his troops up to the line, and they started capturing the Germans. They consolidated the positions of them and the objectives that were available. During this time, he got injured in the leg, but that didn't stop him. Him and his men, they continued to go forward and forward, gathering and obtaining more objectives along the way, for finally getting the most important objective that was strategic on the battlefield. After the war, Major Perks became distinguished in his career and ended up being a Major General, and he went on towards to become the Minister of Defense in 1957. Next. One 17th, there's an article on Google it, Gilbert's Gallopers, Rise and Falls of the 117th. Great article, explains really well what happened with the 17th. Basically, quick summary, the recruiting effort wasn't going as well as Canada wanted it to be, so they sent off people into townships to try to increase the numbers. What better way to do that was to promise the area that you could form your own battalion, you would fight together, you'd stay together, basically you'd fight alongside your brother. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Yes, the unit was raised, it was all made up of township people, but once it got overseas, and it was made up of 53rd, 7th, 11th, 26th Stansted, they would go overseas. Once they arrived there, they were told to remove their cap badge, and you are now redistributed to fill in the holes of other battalions that had suffered major loss. So a lot of these people, they didn't fight together. Some of them went with the 5th CMR if they were lucky. Next. Now we got a couple photos of the 117th. This is in Richmond. Next. This is the colors of the 117th. It is shown in St. Peter's Church in Sherbrooke. Get a good look, all our colors are in there. Next. This is what camp life looked like for the battalion. Next. So we talked about World War I. What happened after World War I? There is an audit commission. And when the government has a discussion, it's never a good idea, or it's never good for the military in itself. The commission itself decided to reduce the number of infantry divisions and the following post-war reorganization of the militia. So the 53rd Sherbrooke Regiment was redesignated as the Sherbrooke Regiment and was reorganized with 2 battalions, which is one was a paper battalion itself, which was people that had fought in World War I. And the 5th CMR was redesignated as the Eastern Townships Mounted Rifles. Next. Then 1929 hit, and the world basically fell to the ground. Great Depression hit, government was poor, and in great need to reduce its expenditures. So in 1936, the government decided to reduce the number of battalion and cavalry regiments. So April 1st, 1936, sad day for you guys, the Canadian militia reorganized the 7th Hussars and the 11th Hussars, and that's when the 7th 11th was formed. Next. The 5th CMR, lots of battle honors, great thing, became the Eastern Township Mounted Rifles, another good thing, merged with the Stansted Dragoons and the 13th Scottish Light Dragoons. But 36 arrived, guess what? We're now going to artillery. So they eventually became the 27th Field Brigade. All the battle honors that was received by the 5th CMR went to the Eastern Townships Mounted Rifles, which then eventually became part of the 7th 11th Battle Honors. Sherbrooke Regiment was also not unaffected by this. In 36, they became now a machine gun battalion. Next. Unfortunately, World War I didn't teach us enough, so World War II arrived. So as you can see, the amount of units has now decreased over the years because of military cutbacks, reorganizations, change of roles, etc. So we have the Sherbrooke Regiment, the Machine Gun Company, we have the Hussards de Sherbrooke, an infantry company in Sherbrooke. Men were pulled from both units. They formed up the Sherbrooke Hussars Regiment. Originally, infantry unit. 7th 11th Hussars, still there, but they started sending men with the Royal Rifles of Canada. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple slides. And we're also part of headquarters in Italy. And the Sherbrooke Regiment was also deployed in as part of a HQ as well. I won't go through all the namings that happened during the war for each of the unit. The SFR basically was like 27th, 12th Canadian Armored. 7th 11th was part of the 16th. They were armored at one point, then they turned into reconnaissance. Basically, you did what was asked at that time. Next slide. So, Second World War. Au début de la Seconde Grande Guerre, 7th 11th Hussars, Royal Rifles Canada, fut mobilisé le 8 juillet 1940 sous le nom du 1st Battalion of the Royal Rifles Canada, en prévision d'être déployé dans le Pacifique. La nouvelle unité arrive à Hong Kong le 16 novembre 1941 et le 8 décembre, le même jour que l'attaque sur Pearl Harbor, les forces nippones ont attaqué la colonie britannique. So Hong Kong got attacked same time as Pearl Harbor. À la suite de longs combats, la garnison a capitulé le jour de Noël 1941 et a été transportée dans les camps de prisonniers de guerre. What a great way to celebrate Christmas. Pendant les 3 prochains ans et 9 mois, ces soldats ont été incarnés à North Point Camp, déplacés à Sham Shu Pu Camp en septembre 1942, et plusieurs ont été transférés dans les usines des mines d'esclaves japonais. Malgré cette importante perte, le 7th 11th, ils ont quand même formé un QG de brigade en Italie lors de la compagnie italienne en 1943 et ainsi poursuivre l'effort de la guerre. 7th 11th Hussars, they mobilized an armored squadron for active service in 41, and then they went to Britain in 41 as well. It was disbanded in 43, absorbed by headquarters in the 2nd Canadian Armored Brigade. Next slide. Sorry for the picture, wasn't the most clear. Basically, this is Bury with members of the 7th 11th training. Next slide. Another picture of the 7th 11th. Next slide. A little bit of the Battle of Hong Kong. You can see how it happened, where people were deployed. Give you a second to look at that. Next slide. One of our artifacts that we have within our unit, basically it's a picture that describes a lot of things all at once. So it's really what happened with this soldier, where he went, and all the movements, all the places he went before he went overseas. Great looking bag, by the way. Next. This here is a photo of the 7th 11th after they were released from captivity. As you can see, a lot of them were skin and bones at the end. because they were prisoners of war, malnourished, etc. Beaten, some even killed. Side story on this, a lot of my notes. Hats off to the officers of the 7th 11th. A lot of them gave up their own food to make sure that their men had enough nourishment to survive. Not a lot of people are willing to do that, especially when you haven't eaten in a long time. Next photo. Sherbrooke Hussars Regiment. So we talked about the 54, 58 side of things. We're going back to the 53rd side of things. We're now the Sherbrooke Hussars Regiment, built off of the Sherbrooke Hussars de Sherbrooke and the Sherbrooke Regiment. So members from each unit pulled together, recreated a new unit. It's supposed to be an infantry unit to start with. Ensuite, été convertis en régiment blindé, font partie du 4e brigade of the 4th Canadian Armored Division, pour finalement devenir the 27th Canadian Armored Regiment, which is the Sherbrooke Hussars Regiment. After a year and a half of training in England, and there's a lot of pre-training before that, where a couple of people have died, mishaps, go to England, a couple more people die. They eventually get their tanks and are deployed to Juno Beach. And D-Day. So yes, after a year and a half training, the attack on Europe is being planned, and le premier char du régiment débarque sur la plage de Normandie le 6 juin 1944 à midi et quart, and se sert dans le territoire européen jusqu'à la fin de la guerre. 22 of our battle honors come from the acts of this regiment and what they've gone through. Again, not enough time to go through all the battles, but there's a good thing for you at the end. Après la guerre, le régiment elle-même était 18 le 15 février 46. So the war's over. We don't need you anymore. You're split up again. Some members go back to the Sherbrooke Regiment. Other members go back to their units. And as the war progressed, people came from all across Canada, so a lot of them back to their units back at home. Next. Photo of the bomb. Mr. Gardner knows this quite well. It was on the Champ de Mars in Sherbrooke. Wasn't really well taken care of, to be honest. The regiment, through a lot of contributions, donations, picked it up, moved it in front of the Williams Street Regiment. What's important about this tank? It's one of two that hit the beach and at the end of the war was still functioning. The other, Holy Roller, was more as a headquarters type vehicle, wasn't in all the attacks. This vehicle, on the line, getting shelled, breaking down, repaired, kept going right to the end. And believe it or not, at the end of the war, it was overseas in Europe. They wanted to scrap it, turn it into metal. Guys from the Sherbrooke area said no, beep and away. We're bringing this back home. This is our war trophy. Next. So, Second World War is over, which means we don't need to spend money on war anymore. Guess what happens? Units start to disappear. So, 15th February 1965, Sherbrooke Regiment, 7th and 11th Hussars become amalgamated, and they eventually create the Sherbrooke Hussars. So, depuis la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, plusieurs membres de l'unité ont servi dans les missions de paix et de guerre sous l'égide des Nations Unies ou l'OTAN. Ont été déployés en Égypte, Sinaï, les terres de Golan, à Chypre, Yougoslavie, Congo, Afghanistan, Haïti et Latvia. And Latvia, just to say, the next 3 years, there'll be a lot of people that had no war. Next. On a parlé des honneurs de bataille. Won't go through all of them. Basically, we talked about 1812, defense of Canada, World War I, all the battles itself. A lot of these are 5th CMR. Battle honors in small capitals are for large operations and campaigns. Those in lowercase are for specific battles. Bold type are the ones that are authorized to be emblazed on the regimental guidon, which is that color there. So all the ones that are bold should be on that as well. Next slide. Second World War, again, very distinguished, lots of battle honors, honorary distinctions, and most importantly, perpetuations. This is basically the history summed up. So Frontier Light Infantry, which is 1812, 1st and 4th Battalions of the Eastern Townships, the 5th CMR, the 117th, basically all their history, which has been absorbed throughout the units as it go down, passed down, be absorbed. It now ends up as part of our history. Next. Honorable mentions, a lot of material that I looked up. Google's good. A lot of it's from war diaries. A big portion of this presentation came from Lieutenant Colonel Dan Braun, retired former commanding officer of the unit. He has produced a book, Greenfields Beyond. It's available on eBay, it's Amazon, etc. Great book, too, that describes the Sherbrooke Hussar Regiment, the battle tactics, and the war itself for World War II. Also, photos, images of uniform, cap badges, etc. A lot of it comes from Duncan Morrison. He's the guy that got me interested in the history of the regiment, and just a hats off to him. Great guy. And that is 157 years wrapped up, hopefully quick enough for you guys.